Welcome to The Power of Construction, a Procore podcast highlighting the industry leaders who are evolving their business today to forge a better future tomorrow. I am your host, Sasha Reed,
And I'm Chris Langiza.
and together we represent a little over 40 years of experience, both in construction and technology. And what we're going to do on this podcast is sit down with some of the best and brightest minds in construction. Our goal is to highlight the new and innovative ways that leaders are overcoming some of their greatest challenges. On this podcast, we're going to be digging into one crucial question, and that is, as an industry tasked with building the future, can we achieve operational effectiveness while becoming better stewards of our people and the resources in process? Throughout the podcast, we'll bring you stories of leaders, we'll break down barriers, and we'll talk about those who are rewriting the rules while empowering their teams to reimagine what is possible. Today, we will be digging into the state of construction, looking to better understand some of the root causes behind declining productivity in order to shift the conversation toward the more of the means and methods of achieving operational efficiency. So with that, I think there's a challenge we want to address here, and that is that construction as an industry is a vital part. In fact, it contributes to about 13% of our global GDP. And while other industries have started to make some leaps and bounds in productivity, construction is still lagging behind. In the U.S. alone, this issue costs the economy about $2.8 trillion each year. And it's not necessarily that construction is incapable of building faster and better. It's just that we haven't yet. So I think what we want to do here is re-examine the state of the industry and take an honest look at how we're delivering projects in addition to what we're delivering to owners. And with external factors like the labor shortage, inflation, we can no longer leverage labor and materials to eke out profitability. Technology really has been rapidly evolving, giving us greater visibility into projects, probably more than ever before. But our processes are lagging, and our people are becoming the human link in bridging those gaps within the business. And this does come at a great cost. And I think some of the labor statistics that we're seeing is telling us what that cost is. So, Chris, I want to bring up a report that I saw recently. It's a McKinsey report. Delivering on construction productivity is no longer an option. And they said something that I want to quote here. The industry faces significant challenges in meeting future demand and sustainability goals due to persistent productivity issues. Despite a projected increase in global construction spending from $13 trillion in 2013 to about $22 trillion in 2040, the industry's productivity has stagnated and sadly even declined in recent years. And we know that there are multi-factors. We know that there is no easy button or single issue here. There are multiple factors. So we can look at labor market issues. We can look at the complexity of projects as projects become more complex and how we manage risk on those projects. And I think the final one to look at is the slow adoption of technology. But Chris, I really want to get your take on where you think some of these gaps within construction are coming from.
Yeah, and I want to key in on the last point there is that technology is not going to solve this problem alone. It's a bit of a fallacy that we can think that technology is going to come in and revolutionize the industry without really starting to think about how we deal with digital transformation. And when we talk about that digital transformation and the changes that we're making in the industry, we really need to focus on the people and the culture that is more widespread in the industry. So
Mm.
how do we upskill the workforce? How do we make them ready to leverage that technology and encourage more workers to come into the industry? How do we make technology usage more widespread across the entire industry and across all trades and all roles? And then what is that connection between the people, the technology, and the communities that will really transform the industry.
And thankfully, you and I don't have to have all the answers today. We have two guests who are joining us here today. We are joined by Peter Tateishi and Josh Bone. Both of these men are trusted partners of Procore, and I want to introduce you quickly to them. Peter is the CEO of AGC of California, which is one of the largest chapters of the Associated General Contractors of America. Since joining in 2018, Peter has been responsible for transforming the association into being a mission-based organization. He and his team work to create opportunities to build and strengthen the state by shaping policy, improving industry relationships, and developing the construction workforce. He was recognized as Most Admired CEO in 2023. He was 40 under 40 in 2013 by the Sacramento Business Journal. And in 2022, he received the Built Community Impact Award by Build Out California. And Josh is executive director at ELECTRI International. If you're not familiar, ELECTRI is a nonprofit that executes research projects and really is looking at transforming the industry. The research that they do is converted into educational content. They do some consulting and have some consulting programs, and also offer practical publications, all aimed at helping electrical contractors up-level their business and tackle current challenges. Josh has worked on hundreds of projects throughout his career, building expertise around the virtual design and construction, or VDC, process, and he's worked directly with both designers and contractors. He is a sought-after speaker, guest editorial contributor, and podcaster. Welcome, both of you, to the podcast today. We are so lucky your calendars align to have you both here today with us.
Thanks for the invitation. We're happy to be here.
So happy to be here. Really excited to have this conversation with two people that I admire and respect.
Well,
Appreciate that.
thank you. I think it's fitting that both of you are here for our very first inaugural podcast episode. It was very intentional that we had both of you here because we really feel like the perspective that you have is somewhat of a third-party perspective looking in, and we're excited to have you bring some of that here to the conversation. But I only scratched the surface with those introductions. I really want to start off the beginning, just giving each of you a little bit of time to talk about the work you're currently doing and some of the things that your teams are focused on. So Peter, I'll start with you.
Right. Well, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's really fun to be able to talk about this important issue and the kind of challenges that the industry, the construction industry specifically, is facing. So at AGC of California, we have been focused on shaping policy, improving industry relationships, and developing our workforce. But that last pillar, developing the workforce, the construction workforce specifically, has been a really huge focus for us. For over 2 decades, our contractors across the country actually have been saying their number one concern is the workforce shortage, especially in skilled and craft labor forces. And so that has become a focus for AGC of California as to how we address and kind of help meet the need of the existing and future workforce in California. So we've launched a couple programs, one of those being Build California, which we're very, very excited about, that is all about telling the story differently, helping people in this next generation, especially Gen Z, see that there are pathways and careers that are great careers in construction. We aren't doing the training. We're doing that kind of top of the funnel, getting folks to be excited about what it could be or what they could have in a career in construction. And as we kind of dove into this whole recruitment side of things and trying to get people excited, we realized, well, how do we retain them? And that's going to be a different kind of conversation. And that opened a different, maybe even a Pandora's box a bit around construction and really what it means to talk about culture within the construction workforce. So we've started to really look at culture, belonging, how we talk about creating a better place or a work environment, and how we focus on people. So that's been kind of our biggest priorities right now at AGC of California, is tackling this workforce conversation and realizing that we need to attract that next generation and we need to figure out ways to better retain them.
Yeah. And I think That's probably why your membership is so strong, is clearly that's what's top of mind of leaders today. And any support they can get that's outside of their own efforts, I think, is much appreciated. Josh, tell us a little bit about the work that you and your team are doing presently.
So ELECTRI International, think of us as tip of spear for the electrical construction industry. We are that applied think tank, a true research and development entity for the electrical contractors to help them stay ahead of the pace of change. In a world right now where we're faced by digital transformation, industrialization, and electrification, it's very tough. ELECTRI acts as that entity for the largest, most sophisticated contractors, but the medium and small. Every electrical contractor, as a 501c3, has the ability to go to electri.org, set up a free account, and download 35 years of research on topics that matter, whether it's standard operating procedures, very important, key performance indicators, all these things. Right now, I'm very excited about the work that we're doing. We've created a new collar apprenticeship. We're building out through a national registration of the Department of Labor project management apprenticeship, giving kids the opportunity to come straight out of high school to go to work in the office for a contractor, understanding that, yes, we need electricians, we need that field, but there's a whole world in the office around marketing, and we need all these to fill these positions. So at ELECTRI, we're moving fast. We try to be that voice for the contractor. Nothing is more important to me and my team than the contractor's time. That value is what we're always trying to drive back, so that when I'm driving here and I'm going to the airport, I talk to this contractor, I talk to this contractor. I'm blessed to get to do what we do and get to operate in a world that is exciting and new, something every day.
Yeah, and we're so excited to have you both here. I mean, I can't wait to jump in, so I'm just going to. One of the reasons we really wanted to have you here to talk about this topic is we wanted to have a broader sense of how the productivity gap is actually impacting the industry. And so, what are some of the recurring themes that you are seeing contribute to this problem? And Peter, I'll start with you.
So I think if you talk to my contractors, their number one concern is that we have an aging workforce. And so there is just a level of, it's I'll say strain that gets put on the body as you get older. In California, our average craft worker is aged between 45 and 47, depending on the trade. That's really not a sustainable age range for us, and we are not replenishing that workforce at any kind of level that will allow us to replace what is retiring out every day in construction. And so as we're kind of thinking about the productivity, we're really thinking about, okay, well, first and foremost, we need to look at that age gap. We need to look at that next generation and bring in a kind of fresh blood, if you will, into the industry to help us really rejuvenate our workforce in a new way. With that, we're also seeing, from our members, what they're saying is that there is a gap between skills and what I'll say the knowledge and capability of those who are in the industry and have been for, 15, 20 years and those coming in. We don't have, I'll say, a laddered approach with workers. We have a missing set of skill sets of that 7 to 15 years of experience. It's just not there at the same level. So as we're really recruiting in, there is this significant difference in understanding where the skill sets are from where they started or where they're starting right now and what's currently in the field. And that takes time to kind of replenish and create a pipeline dynamic.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to throw out some statistics. You guys know that is my thing, as I love the numbers. And last year, looking at the data, 15% of projects were completed on schedule. 30% of projects, this is capital projects now, so focusing on some of the numbers that we have, 15% completed on schedule, 30% completed on budget, but we're right around 10% when it comes to hitting schedule and budget. I think we're at a point right now in the industry when we look at our productivity, construction is tough, and I believe it's gotten a lot tougher. If Chris and I were talking and I've had this epiphany. Think about where we were, just rewind 25 years ago. A hospital. Think about 25 years ago when I came into the industry. I've been in the industry for 26 years. We had paper plans. Changes were a lot less common, big transformational changes didn't happen like they happen now.
Right.
GC's self-performed work. I wonder what the scope of the actual project was. I guarantee you on a hospital, the core and shell cost more than the MEP systems. I guarantee that's not the case today. I look at, if we had 25 electricians on that job site, 20 of them could run work, and most of them were willing to. Today, I mean, you look at these nuances and these factors of where we're at, we have to do something different because we're playing by the same or similar rules. We've created this playbook for ourselves, and the playbook has not changed, but everything else has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have to be more intentional. We're going to have to be more strategic with our workforce, addressing it. Our engineers, with the design and means and methods, we're going to have to be far more intentional about how we overcome this productivity gap. I don't know that it's necessarily fair in all ways, but we're all being impacted by it. And when you start looking at some of this data out there with Construction Dive, in 22, $97 billion in costs was eaten by subcontractors. We can't afford to keep doing that. $40 billion in productivity impacts. That there's a lot of money and a lot of opportunity there. If we start to do this right and figure some of these things out, it's going to be critical for the future success of companies in this industry.
Yeah, we're talking about some big dollars, and to save you all from rewinding to hear what those numbers were, 15% on schedule, 10% on schedule and budget.
Budget.
$97 billion lost, eaten by contractors, and then $40 billion lost due to productivity.
There's a sense of urgency right now in the industry from owners, from the design, from the general contractors through the trades. There's a sense of urgency. The profitability, guys, is down.
Mm-hmm.
Profitability. We've had a growing economy for 13 plus years. I'll be conservative in that.
Right.
Top line growth, revenue looks really good. Bottom line, it's not reflecting that. It's time to change.
Right. And I think that's what really spurred us on to start this podcast, was to look at some of these indicators and then really start to do some root cause analysis. I don't think anything that we're going to discuss today is going to be earth-shatteringly new, but we're pulling all of these pieces into a conversation. And if I'm hearing each of you, and I distill it down to 3 things that I'm hearing. The first is the cost of an experience. What is that? How is that impacting us? The aging workforce. And then I think the third piece is that delivery methods and contracts piece to it. So what I'd like us to do is kind of, let's take each of those separately and talk through them a little bit. So starting with the cost experience, when you look at the cost of inexperience, how are you really seeing that impacting contractors? Josh, I actually want to start with you.
Yeah. So we're doing research on this and we're ready to release this. We've gone through a design thinking workshop with the Construction Progress Coalition. We're seeing that this cost of inexperience is a multiplier. You have today on many big projects out there with the complexity, you have 26-year-old kids running MEP coordination put into a position where they're not set up for success. And I think if you look across our industry, that's what this cost of inexperience is doing, is we're putting a lot of stress on our workforce. They're being asked to do things that are really outside of their abilities. So when we start to look at engineers, and we go back to that story again 25 years ago, the designs are less complete. And we're all in this game of buying and selling risk. And with that cost of inexperience, it's impacting us at every single level in all of these silos, where I think we've got to look at this. We've got to be more intentional about how we share knowledge. And I think one of the things that we can do more than ever is build better contracts that have trust, use better data to be more transparent than ever. We've got to be realistic that, hey, this schedule's not realistic. We've got to work together and come up with something and get the owner. It's not realistic. I had a contractor tell me last week, we're working on a big job, and the owner came back to us and said, we can't afford to work this much overtime. So instead of cutting it down from we're going to work 6 10s, we're going to cut it down to 5 10s. The project end date doesn't change. So let's do the math on that.
Right.
Where are we going to get that from? That I think we're setting ourselves up today that we're just buying and selling off this risk, putting this inexperience at the electrician level, actually doing the install. We are at a point right now in our industry, in our world, that we're moving so fast and these jobs are happening so quickly. A lot of these electricians aren't getting the well-rounded experience they need to be that everything you need to be able to do all the work. So we're forcing them to operate in a way where they're becoming installers.
Right.
So they're not these problem solvers. And then that goes back to the superintendents and the project managers. And then all uphill, you've got the CMs out there doing this. And it's the cost of inexperience is a huge part of our problem. And it's not an easy thing to address.
And Peter, I think that's what we really wanted to hear, kind of the specialty contractor impact here, but from the general contractor side, what are you seeing?
It's similar. I mean, it's a reality that the inexperience is costing us, and the schedule dynamic is really important. Owners, I'll say, have a somewhat unrealistic expectation on what schedules are, and I think that's informed sometimes by design teams and engineering teams that don't necessarily know the constructability of what they're asking. And in there, though, what we're seeing is so hard is that when you do that, right, when you put a schedule that is, I'll say, somewhat unrealistic, your example of moving from a 610s to 510s, but not changing the schedule, what you're saying is we don't have time to train. We don't have time to bring on that apprentice because that apprentice is learning on the job, as they should. But that means they're going to go slower. They're going to be different in what their capabilities are. And they're supposed to have that mentor, that journey person being able to help them along in their growth. We're not incentivized to use those apprentices anymore. We're looking at this as we've got to have the most experienced, capable individuals who are going to ensure that the schedule becomes the priority. And all that does really is, again, create a wider gap on that experience. We're pushing that down as GCs, right? Every day we've got to meet the owner's desires and needs and take on that risk. But it's really hurting our ability to, I'll say, be good stewards of the industry long-term for these short-term realities that we're just trying to meet. And so that's going to be one of the things that we've got to help owners understand is that if you want us to replenish the workforce, we need time. We need ability to say it is important to bring on folks and train them up and allow them to, I'll say, grow in their careers and their professions so that we can support the development then of, backfilling foremen to then hopefully develop superintendents and other parts of the roles that we need to continue to replenish because, candidly, like we're, as the GCs, we are struggling right now to find experienced or people who want to go into the superintendent route. That is not necessarily the primary role that they're looking towards. And the superintendent is so critically important to the success of the job and the schedule and overseeing and bringing, really kind of conducting the whole job site in some regards. But we don't have the ability to train up into that. We don't have the time, I'll say, to mentor that next superintendent into the role. So owners need to, I'll say, give a little reprieve and a little appreciation that if they want the next project to be better and to have higher productivity, they need to start allowing, the experience to start happening on the current projects.
And I love that. And I think those two things are very well tied to the aging workforce. We're trying to constantly fill this somewhat leaky bucket of people coming into the industry and those who are aging out. And for a lot of them, that experience is walking out the door with them. So maybe, Peter, can you tell me a little bit more, like, what are the things that your members are feeling from that aging workforce, and how are they trying to maybe combat it a bit as well?
So, I mean, obviously, if you're spending your career out in the field, right, it's hard work. And it's challenging on the body physically and emotionally. And so we're asking people to stay longer and longer than, I'll say, what we promised them when they started. There was a sense of, in construction, especially if you started as an apprentice, that there was this kind of number, this kind of like you get to 55, I think we've pushed it now to 60, but it wasn't the idea that you were working to 67 or to 70, the way that many other, I'll say, industries beyond construction kind of have an expectation, right? When you think of your retirement age, you tie it to Social Security. in construction, we never really tied it to those things. We had pensions, we had opportunities where people could come in, work very hard early, and kind of retire at an age that felt, like you were advancing differently than, I'll say, the other industries out there. That was one of the recruiting benefits. That's shifting. We're having to ask people to stay longer and longer. And that continues to have a physical toll on a body that's already tired. And so I think that's one of the things that we're recognizing that we're struggling with, is that we're asking people to continue in their journey long past, I'll say, what the commitment or promise that was made to them at the beginning. Let's not say we're trying to push people out either. If people want to stay longer and stick around, like, we love that too, but we're having to convince more than we are having to, I'll say, reward those who are just making the choice to say, I don't want to retire. So I know a lot of our contractors are asking people to stick around. I know a number of individuals who are kind of having a second career at a second company. They've retired out and they're continuing on because we're having to pay to bring that experience back onto the job site, which again goes to then cost margins and everything else, because we're paying for highly experienced individuals because there's no backfill to kind of just promote up there. So we're working hard to try to, I'll say, incentivize people to stick around longer than I would say their original promise was given to them.
And are you seeing opportunities for some of that aging workforce, maybe that is towards the end of their career, to adopt new roles within inside of the companies that they work for? Or maybe they're taking on that second stage of their career? Like, are we trying to do our best to take advantage of all the knowledge that's inside of their, or under that hard hat that they've had for so many years?
I think the answer is yes and no. I think there is absolutely an effort made by some to say, let's try to advance and retrain in a lot of ways. At the same time, I think we're resistant to change. We're not an early adopter kind of industry. And so the innovation that comes there becomes more, well, they're really good at bringing to life what they're already doing, so don't change that, right? And so it's less about, I'll say, the retrain opportunities that we probably should be looking at in all truth to kind of build our productivity better. Having said that, I can think of some really good contractors who are seeing that opportunity and saying their experience and wisdom means we could leverage that to learn and change how we do business. Because if we just listen to these experienced individuals, we could do things differently and better. I would just say it's not as widely prevalent as we need it to be right now.
So we work with the Construction Labor Market Analyzers, CLMA. They do a lot of work with CURT, the Construction Users Roundtable, and owners. They released in 23 a research project for the big owners, capital project owners, and told them in 23 that basically we're looking at today, 11 years from now, losing almost 60% of the existing craft workforce. 6 out of 10 of the existing craft workers. That's masons, that's iron workers, that's electricians, all. But they're telling us we'll lose a quarter of that by the end of next year, when they came out with this research just a couple of years ago. And we're seeing those numbers come to fruition. We're watching that happen. I think we've got to be realistic, and so much is changing so fast, and we've created this divide of sending kids to college and not going into the trades, that gap has been created. So we need to be strategic and intentional about how we look at this going forward. It's not going to be the way we've done it. It's going to be through prefab. It's going to be through offsite construction. It's going to be through other methods of how we deliver jobs with this manufacturing mentality. We've got to be very dialed in and have the time and the planning. And, I see there needs to be this convergence of design and constructions and really thinking about means and methods, as you were saying, Peter, earlier, that we cannot continue to do things the way that we've done them. We've got to use new methods, new delivery. We're just not going to fill that gap. So we've got to be very careful about what's our strategy? How are we going to do this together? And hopefully some of this data and some of these tools can help us build more trust through transparency. I talk a lot about it's abundance times. You've got more on your plate a lot of times than you want to handle. You know what? Specialize and look at how do you want to start doing temporary power? Sub that out. Joint venture. We've got to be more strategic in how we break down these jobs and manage our risk. When to buy prefab, when to build it yourself.
Right. And you led in perfectly to the third piece that I really want to kind of touch on, because there's two components here. There's the delivery means and methods, and then the contracts. And I really like to get from your vantage point, what you're seeing on how that's impacting the business, which I think you started to touch on here, but probably more importantly, how that's impacting people. Peter, I'll start with you.
So this is, I think, the crux of everything, to be perfectly honest, is when we think about the delivery methods and I'll say resistance to change that we were just talking about, it really comes down to the fact that if we look at, I'll say, just a hard bid dynamic where low bid wins, that's a race to the bottom. It disincentivizes innovation. It disincentivizes making any changes to the current status quo. Because if you're the contractor who's making the changes and making those investments and your bid comes a little bit higher because of that, you're going to lose. You've lost because low bid wins. And therefore, there's a sense of I have to keep up with my competition in racing to the bottom. And that's the challenge that our industry faces when we think about it. So we have to start evolving that conversation, and we have to become, if we're going to actually make a change long-term on workforce, on how we're perceived as an industry and how we work together, we have to be talking about this collaboration or collaborative build dynamic where we start with owners and design teams and even CMs, GCs, and specialty and subcontractors and DBEs and others that need to come into this conversation and talk collectively on how we're going to work together from the beginning. Because otherwise what keeps happening is just a risk mitigation. Push down, push down, push down, push down, and figure out, someone else's responsibility. Well, at the end of the day, all that does is say to the person at the lowest part of this is, why am I doing this? Why would I want to take this on? And then when we think about the opportunities that can be diminished, you want to talk about small and underrepresented businesses. If they're carrying that kind of risk or they can't get in because the risk is too great, they're leaving. And they're not going to stay with our industry. And that's a loss because every one of the big, I'll say, GCs that exist today and big specialty contracting, they started there as a small company at some point in time. And we have to recognize that if we're going to stand up that next company, we have to figure out how we invite them in and create a space where we are collaboratively building together. And that's going to be important. And I don't know that we have necessarily the right solution, but what I know is that we have to look at alternative delivery methods. We have to look at ways in which we can bid the project differently and work with owners from the beginning to talk about the things that we want, not just in the contract, but as mandatory in your bid proposals. And so I'll give you an example of something that right now doesn't exist and is going to open up a whole other conversation at some point. But, when you look at right now a craft worker, for the most part across the country, as a craft worker, if you show up, you get paid. If you don't show up, you don't get paid. So it's that simple. And we don't typically have paid sick leave for our craft workers. Well, if you get injured on the job site, a small minor injury, what typically ends up happening is you can't afford to go see the doctor, take time off to do that. So you self-medicate. And there's no wonder then why we have an opioid addiction in the construction industry. When 23%, nearly 1 in 4, of all opioid overdose deaths in any industry is a construction worker, we have a problem. And it comes down to we can't bid sick leave into our packages because that's going to go to the owner, and that means we may lose the project. So if the owner wants our people to be stronger and better and safer and have a better experience and better quality of life, we need to have those conversations so that the bidding supports contractors who are willing to invest in people and changing culture within the industry. So delivery methods are 100% a part of this and how we look at getting, those who are going to start, and that's the GC, taking the big risk and putting the bids together to be able to say, I can win this bid. I can work with this owner with this price tag to support everything down below in making change.
I love that because I think so much of what we do in this industry is based off our gut and intuition. How much of that is real? I don't know. I think, I look at a design, bid, build, delivery project. Who's going to be the lowest bid? And I look and an owner looks at that and says, I'm going to get the best price by putting a job out with that delivery method. When in reality, I don't think that's the case at all. That I think if we step back and we looked at a job and we were realistic about working 610s, what does that do to your productivity week over week over week. We have the data.
We've measured it.
We've measured that,
Exactly.
and there's information that says that's not the right thing to do, to take a couple weeks and then go back to a schedule that's more conducive. Maybe it's even 4/10s. Give them that longer weekend to recover and pick that back up. Nothing is more detrimental to a project. When you talk about working together and how we're going to approach this job, and you start to have some of those conversations and you read the contract, pay if when paid, liquidated damages, no caps on you start to break down some of these things and you look at the payment terms, and instantly we become, there's animosity there. It's that protectionist nature that you fall back into to look after yourself and protect your people. You look at a lot of these owners on capital projects, they would never work their people 6/10s, 7/10s. They wouldn't do that to their own companies working in these manufacturing lines, yet we don't think anything of it to put a construction crew out there working in the heat, 90 degrees, day in and day out, trying to get this thing dried in. We've got to change that. The contracts have to reflect the benefit. And if we're going to continue to commoditize this process, think about what's happened to integrated project delivery. IPD, this thing that we all talked about and everybody's been that has worked on IPD jobs can say good things about it. But the owner didn't feel like they were in enough control. The owner didn't feel like they were getting the best price. And how many jobs do we see as IPD? Luckily, we see some progressive owners coming back to target value delivery, and CEMs doing some great things like TAC planning and working together. There's a lot of great tools out there. It's just we've got to do a better job of working together and really understanding that you talk about productivity. Every single thing on a construction job site, if we do out of sequence work, right now, delayed claims are the highest they've ever been. A good construction attorney friend of mine has been in the industry for over 30 years. He says, Josh, I've never seen anything like it. Every day brings a newer, bigger claim. A lot of that goes back to those contracts, that project delivery method. So it's not helping the owner. It's not helping the CM. It's not helping the trades. We've got to reevaluate this and be more balanced in how we approach project delivery as well as the schedule. I think the schedule is a big part of this.
Huge
What's
part of it.
realistic?
And I think you've gotten to many of the root causes of why we are where we are today. Now, I know each of you are doing some work to focus on addressing several of those root causes. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that work is and what are you actually doing to change this? And then as a follow-up to that, if it goes the way that we want it to and it works, what does the future of construction look like if we get there? And Josh, I'll let you go first.
So we are doing a lot of best practice research and education. So we're trying to take our research and move it beyond just a white paper. We're trying to turn that into curriculum. We're turning it into other forms of delivery that contractors can operationalize in their business, something they can consume and in turn use. So we're doing research on looking at productivity. We're doing research on how to mitigate and how to manage claims when they happen, when there's out of sequence work or compressed schedule, how to deal with that, how to get it back on track. So we do a lot of best practice research, and there's so much on our website, from lean delivery methods. There's a lot of tools out there that we're putting out there for contractors. We've been doing some work recently with the Project Production Institute, trying to use some of their operations efficiencies that they're taking on, their operations science, and how to apply that. So we're always looking for new, innovative ways to be more productive and trying to hand that information to the contractor. I think we're at a stage right now looking at the future of our industry. I think we're at a crossroads. I think there's a path where we all say, we're going to do what we've all been doing, but we're going to work together. We're going to be more transparent. We're going to build better contracts. We're going to deliver jobs that set up the designers all the way through to the owner and handoff, that we're going to do this right, and here's the way that we're going to do it. The alternative is if we can't work together and figure that out, the future is manufacturing of construction. And it's going to be consolidation, the bigger getting bigger. You're going to see modular delivery of entire electrical rooms, new systems, and it's going to be more owner furnished, contractor installed. And I really think those are the two options that are in front of us. Maybe it's a combination of the two, but I know that owners are not going to continue to accept the numbers that they're at today. That they're going to demand change, and we're all going to have to work together to figure that out. So I believe we're at a point right now. We're starting to see the future. It's really here. It's not evenly distributed, but we're starting to see signs of the number of modular construction, the volume of work going up, and the big components and big skids. We're seeing those shipped around the country more and more, and I think you're going to see more of that. But I hope that we can continue to deliver some jobs, work together, in the benefit of all of us.
I mean, all of that is exactly spot on, right? Best practices and trying to like foresee where our owners are going to go. But that's where I think at AGC of California, we're focused right now is trying to like build a stronger relationship with owners, especially public owners, where, you know, we have legislation that kind of requires the kind of delivery methods that we're using, and make some shifts around that, because we have opportunities to help educate owners and to help them, I'll say, be part of the process a little bit differently beyond just here's our budget, here's our schedule when we need it. Because I think to your point earlier, we talked about this idea of commodity, and people aren't commodities. And that's the problem is when you look at construction, we're seen as a commodity, but it's still a people business. And these people in there need to be recognized for the work they do, for the fact that they have lives, personal lives, professional lives. They want growth, they want challenge, but they also want the ability to provide for their families and do great things. And when owners really just see it as, I have this to build X and I want it on this schedule for Y, we don't see what it takes to really to make that happen, and we miss it. And long term, that's going to then force change, maybe good, maybe not so good, in how we end up building projects for owners in the future. And that's where I think the now moment really is around how we bring owners into this conversation, design firms into this conversation around what does it take to get to constructability? What does it take from a people dynamic? And how do we support them differently and better so that we can attract and retain workers in this industry? And that's a piece that is going to be hard. And, you know, I'll say RGCs get nervous about going to their owners and kind of saying to the person who's going to award the bid and the project to a GC, like, hey, you're doing this wrong. But that's where I think groups like ELECTRI and groups like AGC and other advocacy organizations can have these types of conversations more globally, work with owners, and not necessarily be a specific contractor, I'll say, complaining or raising these issues, but knowing that the industry is, that we are representing an industry that is needing to have bigger and better conversations so that we start looking at this industry for what it really is, which is, it is industry number one. It is the most important industry at the end of the day, because our quality of life is dependent on what we build in every facet, right? You can't grow farms without water. You can't transport those goods without roads. You can't have all of the things that we have in this world without construction. And so owners need to recognize that, like, what we're building for them, for the public, for the communities around us, is also being done by the people who live there, by the people who want to have lasting impact in their communities. So when we can bring that together, when we can really, I'll say, get to the collaborative point where everyone is seeing us as an industry of choice that is doing big, great things, then we can make the impact and we can start changing and getting better contracts, better delivery methods. And I think then we can open the door to really looking at a long-term workforce sustainability.
I really hope the future of construction, they see us more as consultants and less as commodities, that we're bringing this knowledge and this value. Electricians, plumbers, pipe fitters are always going to have work. They're always going to be in demand. To what level and how that's delivered may look different over time, but construction will always be here. How we do it may evolve and change. But I'm very optimistic about where we are, and I think we're up to a point today where we've got to be more proactive. We got to think more like businesses. We've got to embrace technology. I talk a lot about Moneyball contracting. How do you play Moneyball contracting? How do you make decisions that are going to increase your profitability, reduce your risk and exposure? And the contractors that figure that out as a CM, as a specialty contractor, they're going to be in the right position to grow and increase profitability.
Well, I think you've just put a good fine point on why we wanted both of you to be here today for our inaugural podcast. And I want to kind of just summarize what I think we heard today, because I think it's worth repeating. When we think about the cost of inexperience, this is across the board. So this isn't something that's just impacting one part of our industry. It's actually across all types of contractors that are experiencing this. The opportunity here, I think, is how do we capture knowledge and embed this more into our process or into our contracts or into, from Chris and ours perspective, as the technology bridging that gap. The aging workforce. There's such an opportunity for us to capture that knowledge before the timelines you've shared with us around retirement age next year. We have
End of next year.
End of next year. Okay.
We still have 18 months.
We have some time.
We'll figure it out by then, right?
We'll take it. We'll take the extra months. But there are things we can start doing today, and it ties right into the next one: means and methods and contracts, rethinking the value of the people who are doing this work. Peter, you've shared with us some statistics around the next generation of Gen Z and how much technology plays a role in them wanting to see construction as a place they want to work. Josh, you've talked about research you've done around working hours and starting hours, hearing from that generation of what they're expecting. It's not like they're making demands. It's an expectation. And other industries are accommodating those and leveraging technology to deliver that. So I'm hopeful that over the next series of episodes on this podcast, we can start to bring forward leaders who are doing exactly what you're saying. They're taking some calculated risks. They're implementing new means and methods in how they're going to solve these challenges.
I will say I'm watching contractors today be very intentional. They're hiring productivity managers and putting plans in place, being very strategic about 2-week look-aheads, planning the work and having a timeline in place. And one of the things I hope contractors will really take into consideration is having a daily work plan and reporting what percentage of that work that gets done. We have to be intentional about productivity, and you can't manage what you can't measure. So you have to start measuring this, and there's opportunity. Contractors that are driving productivity, that are focused on this, are seeing the gains, but they are very strategic and very intentional about that and how they're moving the needle.
And it's really interesting. If you look at this next generation, they're wanting employers who are seeing basically just that, how to increase their productivity, how to make their ability to do their job easier, better, faster, so that they can work 8 to 10 hours, usually 8 is their preference, but be able to then, go home and be able to enjoy it, not because their body's so exhausted that they can't enjoy their personal time. And so it's important that we start recognizing that technology is not seen as a threat to the existence of the job. It's a resource to help improve their productivity of it. It's interesting. Adobe came out with a Gen Z survey, and it said 70% of Gen Z would leave their current job for an employer who gave them the necessary technology to do their job better. And so if we as construction aren't doing that, if we're not looking at ways where they're going to sit there and they're going to know, Gen Z as it's coming in and has been coming in for the last 4 or 5 years now, they know what technology is available to them. And when we as an industry are resistant or reluctant even to implement those tools and those resources that can help them be better, we're going to lose them. They are going to make that choice. 70% would change. That number we just need to understand would change tomorrow because they're not married to the idea of this is my only option.
Right, exactly.
They look for the impact. We can provide that. And then they're looking for employers who are going to help them make that impact better. That's our opportunity.
Well, on that, I want to thank you both so much for joining us today here for this conversation. I also want to thank you on behalf of Procore for being such treasured partners with us. Clearly, what you're delivering for your members is necessary and needed. This is not a challenge to be tackled alone, and I think it is going to take more discussion. So, from Chris and I, we want to thank you so much for being here today and joining us.
But before we let you run out the door, we have a few rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Ready?
Oh boy.
You want to take a cleansing breath and get ready for this.
All right,
Let's
collect
go.
your thoughts. And full disclosure, they do know what the questions are, but that's okay.
Just got them this morning.
Yeah, all right. So, what book are you currently reading or listening to, or what book would you most recommend to others?
I'm going to go Built to Fail, which is a book in our industry that I highly recommend. And I just did Audible with Breathe, and I enjoyed that book so much. Just a great history on how humans have changed. Our brains have gotten bigger, and with it, our breathing's gotten worse.
Love it.
So we just finished, and our whole team is now doing this whole series around outward mindset. So we're using outward mindset right now just to start thinking about how we, I'll say, hold perspectives in making choices in what we do and how we can be better around that. So that's kind of our big book right now that we're working on. And I would highly recommend it to folks to challenge their assumptions. I think we all think we have outward mindsets, but we don't always really hold there very well.
So, what's your go-to source for gaining different perspective or more informed perspectives?
I know my two.
Go.
So I have Peter Diamandis, his abundance blog. Highly recommend that. And you know what I still love is setting Google alerts. I've been doing artificial intelligence in construction, and that when that pops up, it gives me a chance just to kind of reset and see everything that's out there. Still set Google alerts for yourself and keep up with what's happening across the industry and get a plethora of information.
I've been on a big Feedly binge, which is like an RSS reader lately.
I love that.
And so
Yes.
just being able to consume a ton of that from sources that are not necessarily specific to you is, I think, really
I
powerful.
like that too.
For me, I don't do well with, like, I'll say, information sourcing, because I'm not good at that. What I can tell you is I surround myself with a lot of people who are feeding me information. So I have a national peer group that is, I'm always asking them, what are you reading? What are you working on? And I do the same thing with my executive leadership team. And so by sharing that information, I think that's where I gather most of my insights to challenge myself. I want to set up Google Alerts. I need to do that because that would probably be
You can
smarter
help him
than
after
just,
this. We'll have a little
have it
We'll have
come
a
to me
tutorial.
instead of
Yeah,
having
yeah,
it
yeah,
come there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Afterwards, we're going to talk. So
All right. So if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, just one, what would it be? And no sport bets, by the way. No, not fair.
I always, what was interesting is if I were to tell my younger self is know your worth. And it's really interesting because I took my first job right out of college, and I went right into politics, and I had gained a lot of experience volunteering and being active in my community and all this other stuff. And it was a great job. It was with a U.S. House of Representative, and I was working for the Congress. I was super excited. I had no idea what a value of my job would have been in that role, and I underbid grossly. I found out later, a year and a half later, that they were prepared to offer me 3 times what I went out there because they said, "What do you need?" And I just wanted the job so bad that I said, again, 3 times lower than what I could have been making at the time. And um, I did not take the time, I'll say, to know my worth at that time.
Mine is very similar. Believe in yourself. Sasha knows this about me. Imposter syndrome is a real thing, and everyone has it. And learning that other people have this and this is a real thing is good to know. It just makes you feel better to know that it's a natural instinct to feel like, why am I on stage? Why am I blessed to have this opportunity to speak with you today? But make the most of it, believe in yourself, and know that imposter syndrome is a real thing, and you'll get over it.
So what's one trend or innovation that you think is going to shape the future of construction?
I will go ahead and say my 3 that I live by is the Asians. and digitalization, industrialization, electrification. But I truly hope that electrification is the one that we start to look at projects as more as not just the cost to design and construct, but the cost to operate and maintain that facility over its life. And that we all holistically learn how to better think about this with building performance standards coming online. The emissions testing of building are coming. Whether you like that politically or not, it's going to create a better built environment. And I think it's a really good thing for the construction and design industry.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The electrification is super important because how we build matters almost more than what we're building today, especially for recruiting that next generation. They want to know that the jobs they're doing are having a positive impact, as well as not just the building itself being good, but how we build matters to them. So I do think that's a part of it. And I think that digitalization is really, for me, it's data. How does data then feed into AI, then feed into how we can be more efficient? And I think as an industry, we've seen it too often and more as like technology is almost like a thermometer versus a thermostat. This is a very rudimentary analogy, but it's this idea that it tells us something. It tells us what the temperature is going to be out. So we know to dress appropriately for cold or warm versus if you use data correctly and you use technology the way, because it could actually create the climate you want. Right. And so that's where if we can get to a place where we start understanding what data can do for us and how it can actually support our job sites differently, we can start controlling more. It enhances productivity differently instead of seeing it just as a complete tool that tells us, basically is reporting the news. When we can move away from that to using it as part of the solution to how we build, I think that's going to be a huge moment for us.
More will change in the next 10 years than the previous 100. The digital age will change more in our lives than the internet and the information age. Digital age takes that information and turns it into something that we can use. It is exciting and scary and all the above to see what this digital age really means for all of us.
Perfect lead into the last question. So if construction had a tagline, what would it be?
I would say, the tagline for me is just Industry 1, right? We are the first industry. We are the foundation upon which every other economy is built. And so we need to own that bigger, prouder, and understand that we are Industry 1.
I say this all the time. The American dream is still alive and well in the construction industry. You can graduate out of high school. You can become an electrician. You can work your way up, become a CEO. You can take it as far as you want to go. There is no limits. You're not judged by all these other factors. It doesn't matter where you graduated. It doesn't matter your pedigree. If you come in and you communicate and you work hard, anything is possible in this industry with a good work ethic and good communication skills. The American dream is still alive and well in this industry.
Wow. With that, I think we'll wrap up. And for those of you who are tuning in, if any of this resonated with you, please feel free to like, subscribe, and share. And we'll continue bringing you the stories of leaders who are not only reshaping our industry, but they're also harnessing the power of construction. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much for having us.